Welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today's guest is Avi Yashchin, founder and CEO of Subconscious AI, a company specializing in a cause very near and dear to our hearts here at Pragmatic: market research. But in this case, it is an AI-driven platform that, in their words, leverages synthetic respondents and causal AI models to help businesses gain deeper consumer insights in a more efficient and ethical way. And I'm totally going to tell on myself, listeners. I accidentally said casual the first time I did this. So now we know it's causal. We knew it was causal. We just said it wrong. But welcome, Avi.
Thank you, Rebecca. So nice to be here. You're not the first person to make that mistake.
You like how I fixed it and then still told on myself? That is exactly who I am.
That's like some good integrity. I like it.
Right?
Yeah.
If I trip and no one sees it, I'm still going to tell everybody, like, look what I did. One of the many reasons I wanted to have you on today is that it's not only just your focus on market research, which is really, really important, and your goal of making it more accessible, but it's also because you've been a product manager, right? You've actually been a product manager on both IBM's Watson's teams and Two Sigma. So you know and feel the need and pains of the product manager in this space. So I think it's going to be a really great conversation. But before we dive into Subconscious AI and kind of what you're doing there, let's dig in a little bit more about your background, your origin story, as I like to call it, because I think it's a little bit different. You have a unique journey. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I started my career on Wall Street at a company that no longer exists. And then I kind of moved into the climate tech space. I remember feeling a little bit frustrated that as a nation we were spending, $500 billion on foreign oil and then, another, $500 billion defending it. You can tell how old I am based on the import-export of oil amounts that I'm quoting there. But anyway, I moved into clean tech. And so I started a clean tech business, which was effectively like a platform for vocational schools to train people on how to install solar panels, perform energy audits. That company got acquired. I ended up going to IBM and starting their business unit, which was, an education business unit in the Watson group, which was kind of using early AI models to build tutoring software and then a couple of other, and then I ended up back on Wall Street. And I remember the entire time as a product manager, the most difficult part of my job was getting my manager to pay, a little bit of money to run an experiment to validate all the assumptions, before we spent this, $5, $10, $20 million, expenditure. And I've always been a consumer of market research, and I've always kind of been in awe of marketing. So I'm really excited to be here.
Nice. Well, and again, it's we have a theory, and we know what we need to do is test it, right? Validate it. We do. One of the things that we teach is the really importance of sort of qualitative interviews, right? You do qualitative interviews. That's where you do discovery, and then you do quantitative studies to validate it, right? This is 100% what we believe, but you're right. It can be hard in the world where we're trying to move so fast. It is hard to get the A-OK to take what feels like the time and money to go and get it. We also have a lot of B2B clients and listeners, and they're like, oh, but you only have this many customers or this many people. It's a small pool. And so I think it's really interesting here what you've done at kind of Subconscious AI, which you also have to tell me why you named it Subconscious AI, although I like to dig into your subconscious. But the sort of evolution of how do I use AI to not just give faster guesses, right, but really recreate the sort of thinking and reasoning and causation that is what we're really looking for in those things. So I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, that's kind of exactly what we're trying to do. you know, language models are quite interesting because we know in some domains they work really well, and in others they kind of don't work well. And language models are not very good at introspecting. If you ask a language model why it makes the decision that it does, it will reliably make something up. and by the way, humans are the same way, right? Like, if you ask most humans, what kind of coffee do you like? If you ask most, American men, what kind of coffee do you like? They'll say, I love a dark, robust blend. That's what they say. And then, if you perform a randomized, controlled, blinded experiment on those men, they mostly like light and sweet coffee, right? And this is something called the say-do gap.
Yes.
And language models, by the way, also exhibit the say-do gap. This is why people don't just want faster horses. They don't want a phone booth on every street corner, right? They want cars and cell phones. So what we do at Subconscious is, instead of just asking the language model what it wants, the same way asking humans what they want is kind of statistically unreliable, we perform experiments on the language model where we force it to make a choice between two options that are very similar in value. And by performing that at scale, we can really understand why the language model is making the decision. And when we compare those to humans, we find pretty reliable replications.
So, and this is likely a reflection of my naivety, but the approach reminds me a little bit of like a conjoint study, right? Where instead of being like, would you rather do this or this, you're giving them lots of variations of those so that, to your point, you kind of get to the core piece. Is that the simple version of your AI model?
That's exactly right. Rebecca, what kind of marketer are you that you know conjoint analysis? Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, pricing. So we've done a lot of pricing studies, right?
Bingo.
So that's where you often see the willingness to pay in the conjoint. So, yes.
Very good.
Well, thank you. Okay, so then you also said, and one of the things you talked about was that your model was, I think it was 85%, near 85%, maintaining near human accuracy at 85% and growing. How do you validate that? Like you said, okay, so we're going to test this and then we're going to go see how it compares to the humans.
Oh, I love these questions. So what we do is we have three forms of validation. Right. But the first step is, if I look at this stack of papers, this is all of the human research in psychology, sociology, and economics that has been replicated by language models. In total, maybe there's, 30 experiments that have been done across OpenAI and Microsoft and all these groups. We have a team that is a team of humans that is transcribing any conjoint study, any discrete choice experiment, any piece of market research that we can find in the public. We're transcribing it into a format that we can run on our system. And so now we have about 1,200 of these experiments, and that we've tested. And what we do is we run those same experiments using language models, and then we measure how similar the results are. And I'm happy to show you some examples as well. It's kind of if you go to our website, there's an entire showcase where anybody can go browse how the humans perform and how the language models perform. And so if you want, I'm happy to share one with you if you want.
Yeah. Well, and just to reflect back, so you took studies that were done on humans. It sounds terrible. They were, conjoint studies, nothing scandalous. And you took that research and you sort of used it. Did you use it to train the models, or did you use it to validate to compare against the results of that similar study with your digital twin audience? for lack of a better word.
We don't use the data to train. We only use it to validate.
Okay.
And that's kind of our superficial level of validation. The second thing we do is when we start an engagement with a client, sometimes the client is skeptical because this is a new technology. It's kind of quite a bold claim. Saying we can get 85, 90% as good as humans in 1% of the time. That's valuable in some use cases, but we always recommend you use humans. But the second validation we perform is in phase 1 of our engagements. We tell the customer, hold back the results of your conjoint. Give us the experiment. We'll run the experiment, and then you tell us how similar they are. And then the third level is with the press of a button, we will actually run the same experiment against humans in parallel, and you can collect that data. We have an early stopping criteria to see if the humans kind of validate or invalidate the language models. Usually the humans validate our output.
You said something there that was, so I played around with it. I told you this, I'll tell the listeners this. I went on this morning and they let you do 2 experiments for free. It's fantastic. It walks you through it. It is helpful if you've done a conjoint before, so you know what attributes to set up. But even there, they give you a sample. And I was like, oh, I remember I do this. But what I found super interesting too was the speed, right? So, I think it was 9.5 minutes, right? From when I uploaded everything until I got back answer. I got back, attributes and weights. And I also got, in addition to sort of the experiment results, it gives me some analysis tools to play around with them, right? Which was really helpful. Like, well, what happens if I would do this? How would that affect the revenue and the piece? So the speed out there, right? 85% accuracy, but at the speed that you can deliver is truly impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's kind of, we kind of like, we explain our product like a digital camera versus a film camera, right? Like the film camera, you're never going to beat the resolution of a film camera. You can only take a couple of photos, and they take weeks and weeks and weeks to develop. And we're offering the digital camera. It's lower resolution, but you can take many more photos, and you get your results instantly.
Yes, and I think I would imagine that you're not saying this is the only research you should ever do.
No, in fact, for customers that have a market research budget, we're finding a lot of them are using us as kind of a pre-test, right? Because the last thing you want to do is spend $2 million on a conjoint or a DCE and then come back and realize, 90% of your variance is explained by price. Right. And your design was kind of off, right? So you can pre-run all of the studies, test for your variables, test for your different populations on our study, so that when you go out to the market, you maximize the tension in the experiment and really learn as much as you can from each task.
Yeah. So one of the other things, when we think about models and when we think even about our own individual use of any of the sort of GPTs out there, right? You see that it learns you. Right? It starts to talk back. I was working with a colleague and his always compliments him, and it was cracking me up. He was showing me a chat. Yes. And I was always like, that's a brilliant idea. And I was like, why is your GPT kissing up?
Rebecca, that's a brilliant question. So insightful.
Such a strategic way. I'm like, mine doesn't do that. It's cracking me up. But how do you... there's good and bad for your business, right? In the model's learning. Some of it's okay, they're getting smarter and smarter, but I also could see, depending on what kind of studies come, that you could start to build in sort of bias, kind of like we think about in the human world, those professional focus group attendees, right? How do you balance those?
Oh man, that is such a great question. Can I share my screen and show you an example?
Yes, and we will. This is one of those. If you're listening on the podcast, you might also want to go check out the YouTube later. But we'll narrate for
you. YouTube. That's YouTube.com. Okay, hold on. See if I can share this here. Can you see that?
I can see that.
All right. So for the listeners at home, this is an AMCE graph. There's dots to the right that cause somebody to make a decision. Dots to the left cause somebody to not make a decision. The study here is an immigration study, kind of topical, right? This is a 2014 study that we replicated. And, Rebecca, you were asking about the bias. And so one of the things we do is, we have this library of human studies. And so we can actually not only see which language model is more similar to humans in its response, but we can also find the bias within the language models. And so we'll go through this real quick in 30 seconds here. So here the question is, who would you prefer to immigrate into the United States? This study, by the way, is replicated over time and across different countries. We're using the 2014 United States model. So women here are preferred to men. Okay, so you see the dot here is to the right. For education, educated immigrants are preferred to non-educated immigrants. Immigrants that speak English are preferred to non-English speaking immigrants. We don't care where you're from, right? We're agnostic to the country. However, when you look at the country of origin being Iraq, now remember this was 2014, humans have a bit of a slight negative bias towards Iraqi immigrants. However, this language model, Mistral, has a pretty positive, a statistically significant positive bias towards Iraqi immigrants. Mistral, as an example, is the French language model that's competing with OpenAI.
Okay.
Right. So you can start to see that bias extended, but the bias for educated women, which by the way you see across. Who do you want to give the COVID vaccine to? Who do you want as a teleworking partner? Who do you want as an immigrant? The answer is always educated women if you're doing a conjoint. But that bias, it remains.
It's interesting. So for those who can't see, so like you ask the questions and then there's, as he said, dots to the left is a negative, dots to the right is here. But in this one, it plots the original human study and then 6 different models, right? And their answers too. So you can see some of the biases that we're talking about in different models and different questions. And that's interesting, like whether it's the source of it but there are a few where you can see like that one. And there's, maybe a profession is financial analyst. There is a GPT-3 Han Mueller who much prefers that over the odds. So it's interesting that some of the models show a different bias.
That's right. Very good. That's right.
Interesting.
And so, so we track that very closely.
So then when you do a study, an experiment through you guys, do you use all of the models and then like find the average? Not the average. You would never use the average.
We don't do the average.
You would never do that.
An ensemble method. It's a fancy way of saying average. We have usually we stick with one language model across the domains. We're thinking about doing different language models per domain. We're thinking about building our own model, kind of human GPT, but that just sounds weird. But right now there's millions of language models. Like you go on Hugging Face, there's literally 1 million different language models you can pull down and run in your enterprise. And nobody is putting these things through any sort of interview process.
Right. Yeah.
And so we can take any language model, we can put it through effectively 100 years of interviews and tell you where these, where is it biased, where is it deceptive, where is it,
Oh, in and of that itself is super interesting as we all pick different models either to use directly or as basis for our own products to be aware of where they may have different strengths or weaknesses, right?
Totally. Well, and so you were asking about the sycophancy. This is a little scary. So if you plot IQ and EQ on 2 dimensions, how are those correlated in a population? It's a low R squared, but in general, how are they correlated?
I don't know.
Well, there's some arguments, but it's slightly negative, right? R squared of minus 0.15, something like that. Now, when you look at most of the benchmarks that language models are being tested against, they're all against the IQ dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've noticed is the more powerful language models are not necessarily behaving as similarly to humans as the older language models.
It's interesting, too, because it's one of the things when I was first getting ready for this that was a little bit skeptical, as I thought, I know how surprising survey results and interviews can be when you talk to humans, right? Like there's we talked a little bit about the see versus do, or say versus do. But there also is like, there's more nuance, and it's like, well, and part of it is an emotional component. And would these models capture that? And it's interesting as you talk about sort of the EQ and the IQ, and as the models get better at that, as they realize you want to compliment when you ask a question, right? It's an interesting path to see.
Well, what I don't think a lot of people realize about language models, they have developed over almost probably 10 years at this point, right? And the very early language models, they weren't even called language models at that time, but the first use case was detecting emotion.
Mm.
The first thing that emerges from language models is this a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment?
Mm-hmm,
and that's what these early language models were used for, classify this review, right? Is it positive or negative? That was the first thing that emerged, was emotions. And so I think the question about can language models identify emotions or show surprising emotions, that's kind of the first thing they were capable of showing.
So I had never thought of sentiment analysis in that way, but you're right. That really is like, does it overall feel positive or negative about us? And it was a huge thing, right? Because it's hard to get that at scale. I hadn't thought that through. One of the other things that I thought was really interesting when I was researching your company was your, he's leaving. He's done with, popped off camera. He's done. It's like too many questions.
Opening the door. It was getting hot in here.
It was like you're being grilled. There's too many hard questions. Heat's on. I get you. Was that your organization employs a lot of behavioral economists, that word. And that was interesting. I hadn't really seen that in a lot of the AI companies I talked to. And I would love to hear a little bit more about why that's so important in terms of causation or versus correlation, and sort of why that was such a big part of how you've organized your organization.
We wanted to make sure that anything we wanted to make sure we could measure the quality of our claims. And with qualitative research, there's a lot of folks doing AI for qualitative research. I think that is quite risky. I think it's very easy to make a low quality digital twin of a person. It's very difficult to make a high quality digital twin. And behavioral economists and economists and econometricians in general, there's a right answer. Mm. There is a value. There is, the price elasticity is a number. The willingness to pay is a number, right? You can measure how confident you are in those numbers. And it was really important for us to be able to make reliable claims and show evidence that this is how human these responses are. This is when they are reliable, when the language models are not reliable. And that has been the North Star for all of our development over the last 2 years, getting these language models to behave as similarly to humans as possible in the context of quantitative market research.
So really, again, I keep giggling because I called it casual, but correlation is not as powerful a tool for much of what we're trying to figure out is causation and decision making and the reasoning behind things, right? That's where we get some of the confidence, and allows us, that sort of market intelligence allows us to make a wider set of decisions. And it feels like that was important for you to be able to deliver that, but also to be able to defend/explain it in a very scientific approach.
Well, we want to give investment grade advice.
Okay, great way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of when you perform just a general survey, how much do you like this? This apple, right? Everyone loves this apple. I love this car, right? Asking, how do I say this? Having a single variable experiment is statistically unreliable. Mm-hmm. And so you see this in like psychology studies, right? People talk about the reproducibility crisis and how papers are failing to replicate, and that's causing a lack of trust in scientific institutions more broadly. And the domain where you see this most sharply is in psychology. 70%, 70% of psychology papers fail to replicate. And it's because they're not really designed very well. They're not designed in a way that is testable and falsifiable and gives you, any sort of number you can rely on.
Yes. No. And I love that investment grade advice is a great way of putting it. You should. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think the other thing when we talk about AI, right? And, anytime we talk about digital twins and using AI to represent humans and the information, the information we're going to use is going to alter how we also work with humans, right? So we're going to use the information from you to do something that will change the way we behave to other humans. There's always an ethical dimension, right? To market research in general. And then I think in here, there's there's an extra layer with synthetic respondents. How do you think about why should we trust you? No.
It's a very valid question. You should always validate any result with actual humans, right? So the unfortunate thing is that's quite expensive, right? So what we're finding is, when you run an experiment, you're effectively collecting priors, and that can take you 6 months to collect your priors. Once you collect all your priors, you build your model. With humans, that's fine, but maybe you don't want to wait 6 months. We can simulate that 6 months of data collection. We can build you a model, right? And you won't need 6 months to validate if our model is right or wrong. If you only have a certain number of respondents, or if it's hard to find these respondents, or you're interviewing centimillionaires, right? And there's only so many of them, we can actually save you that 6 months. Say, here's the model. Now, within 2 weeks, you can test if our model is right or wrong, right? And so we always want to have humans in the loop. And then as far as ethics goes, quantitative market research is a little bit of an ivory tower. It's kind of this PhD level discipline. And, we want to bring that discipline down. So what we say is we want a 7th grader to be able to run their own behavioral experiments. And it's not as good as humans, but we want people to learn that discipline. We want to teach people to think causally. And this is really the only exposure that I think most people will have to causal thinking. So I think it's really kind of unethical not to teach people how to design and run experiments like this. So
it's a really interesting approach. Can you just walk us through what, if you get a new client, what you want, what is your ideal flow for them to go through? What is the best, your best customer is going to come to you and say, all right, I want to do this. I have this thing. What is sort of the process, the flow of human to conjoint to this, to that? How would you map that out?
Yeah, we start with the outcomes. So we make sure that in a first engagement, we're very clear about the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. Increasing basket size, minimizing returns, increasing revenue, increasing time on site, whatever your business metric is, we make that really clear. And then we spend a lot of time teaching the customer to ask the question about what human behavior would result in a change in that outcome. And then we run experiments on understanding that behavior. So we have 2 phases. In phase 1, we validate that our system works against some sort of known data set that someone's collecting, right? And then once that's proven, then in phase 2, we then commercialize either lead scoring or message testing or product design in the customer's product. We have an API, we call it, behavior change as a service. And then that commercialization process takes, between 3 and 6 months.
Nice.
Yeah. It's like it's 0-second implementation for, for some quite strong capabilities.
Absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about B2B to B2C. You and I talked to me a little bit before the show, and I did my experiment. I was a B2B mindset, and much of the sort of respondent criteria that I could pick definitely seemed more B2C. So I was thinking about this tool as a B2B tool. How do you use it today? What are the, sort of functionality as a B2B product manager that I could use this tool?
Yeah, so we're finding marketing agencies and market research agencies are using this. And the typical use case is someone will run a qualitative study, and the customer says, great, I love this qualitative study. I found all these new features. I found these, these potential new use cases, these orthogonal, subgroups of people that could use my product. Great, now what? Right? And well, then so when you have these qualitative studies, that's kind of descriptive. You're describing the world as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in some cases it's predictive, but that's usually rare. And in order to get a prescriptive option, right, we know people are reacting negatively to this new movie trailer that we produced. Okay, great. Now what?
Yeah.
Why are they reacting negatively? So for that, you need to run some quantitative research, right? And that tells you exactly which people like or dislike which features of your movie trailer. And so you can change your movie trailer, change your price, change your product. You can change your political policy, right, based on your population. And so what these agencies do is they'll use our platform to show the client what quantitative research is capable of. To kind of say, okay, great, you did this $200,000 qual engagement. Now we want to sell you on a $2 million quant engagement. They don't have that budget. They don't understand the value. They'll bring us in to kind of tease the customer into showing them what's possible. Others are using our product with a big asterisk saying this is synthetic, and let's go use this to help incentivize to explore deeper with a human study.
Nice. What kind of, I know, clients are generally private, but what kind of impact has you just seen? What kind of, give me some good success stories.
Yeah. So we had a SaaS product that used our system, and our system said that he was wildly underpricing his product. He was pricing it, $99 a month. And we told him to raise his prices to, I think it was like to $400 or $500 a month.
Wow. And
he ended up, with a 300% increase in revenue. He lost some customers, but most of the customers paid.
Every listener would like that result right now, just so we're clear. Like, that is your dream result. Oh, look, there's not really any pricing elasticity. I'll take it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We had another instance where there was an aerospace manufacturer, and they were trying to sell. They were coming up with a new human spaceflight product, and the idea was, you can spend 2 weeks in space. This is such a great benefit. And when we ran the experiment, right, there's only so many centimillionaires you can survey, right?
There's only so many people like, my next vacation.
And our results showed that people don't want to spend 2 weeks in space. They want to minimize their time in space, but they want a lot of press. Right? And so you can get insights like that to help design some sort of first of a kind product.
Nice. So, you were talking about language models have been around, 10 years. We think about sort of not yours, but the average of us have been interacting with it for, 18, 24 months now, right? And when we think about the GPTs, tell me how you see this progressing. When you think about AI and market research, what is your dream for subconscious? What is your thinking about what's possible and what we should be aiming for?
Since you seem to have a bit of market research or behavioral science background, I will say that language models kind of feel like, to borrow Daniel Kahneman's phrase, system one thinking. Right? They're very kind of immediate. They don't really plan. They don't really understand cause and effect. They don't understand trade-offs. They don't understand why they make the decision they do. So with subconscious, we're allowing a language model to reflect, to run experiments on itself, to understand why it makes the decisions that it does, to build kind of a system two, a deeper level thinking with planning, with cause and effect. Now, if I make this change, this is what the outcome will be, right? So I would I would love if we could teach these things the impact of some of their actions. I think there's a lot of marketing right now that is spent on what's called limbic capitalism. It's kind of like these BJ Fogg, like short loops with, trigger action reward loops that while they may be profitable for some companies, have these externalities that are really negative for the user. And so I think systems like ours could help expose the costs of some of these systems.
Yeah. Well, I teased this question in the very beginning, but I would be curious as to how you landed on subconscious AI for the name.
This is an open call. I am hoping that somebody can come to me with some experimental design that can either prove or disprove that these language models are conscious, right? That would be just absolutely lovely. I know that when I fill out a market research survey, I'm usually pretty well compensated, and it takes a lot of time. And we're running like hundreds of thousands of years of studies. We're asking these language models to perform all this market research, and they are not compensated. And it is a hard task. And so I hope they're not conscious.
They're going to be mad and they're coming for you.
Right. But the language models are the subconscious, and we are building the system too. We are hopefully building the kind of more conscious layer.
Nice. Oh, yeah. I love that. I also think it was an interesting, when I was thinking about, as we were talking earlier, when you talked about the say versus do, right? And when you're consciously thinking about your answer to something versus when they give you a bunch and it, what it rises up to is what you would really do. So got two means.
Well, and the most interesting thing about the say-do gap is marketing is only effective in the say-do gap. If the say-do gap is small, marketing is not effective.
That's true. Interesting. All right. We talked about lots of different stuff today. If you wanted our listeners to do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would you have them do?
Make sure your words and actions align so you are not susceptible to
marketing.
Limbic capitalism of marketing. Yeah.
As the marketer on the call. No need. I was kidding.
And then 2, I would say bring your thorniest questions about the say-do gap. When do people act differently than they behave in a business context, and bring that to subconscious and try the platform. Join our Discord. We're looking for skeptics. We're looking for people to kind of challenge us, and because that really makes us better. It's an open community. It's a great group of people.
Yeah, and I think, for me too, it's a great experiment. It really does help you kind of understand conjoint and decisions and choices. And there's lots of use cases. But anytime you're thinking about packaging or, which features will drive which, there's a lot you could, I'm sure that our listeners are already pondering the trade-offs that, we all have limited resources that they could bring to subconscious AI and start to play around with, how might I really get the right answer? Because it's not, would you like this feature? Because everyone's going to say yes. It's not even, would you like this feature or this feature, right? So really thinking that through and getting to experiment, I think would be a great for all of the listeners. So subconscious.ai. And this is where we also learned that I had a hard time spelling subconscious when I went there today. I was like, apparently I don't spell that word very often.
Me too.
I bet it's in your email address too. All right. If listeners want to learn more about you and the work you do, where should we direct them?
Join our Discord, follow us on LinkedIn,
Perfect.
Visit our website.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Avi, for joining us today. This was a great deal of fun, and I really appreciated having you on.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was a privilege.
Excellent. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.